My name is Akshat Rathi. I'm a senior reporter with Bloomberg News and host of the podcast Zero. And thank you very much for joining us, Kadri. We're going to get directly into questions because there are many. There are lots of big live topics that are affecting EU's energy policy, and you get to decide many of those and push them forward. So one thing connecting us to what COP28 is about, which is setting globally agreed targets. 200 countries may come together and may sign off on tripling renewable energy. There's already more than 100 countries agreed to it. One of the things you need to do for that is to push wind power deployment, which is currently struggling in the EU. Many of the companies that are powering EU's offshore wind development, which has been phenomenal, has been world leading, are struggling. What is it that you are doing? We've heard from Germany as they're trying to help Siemens, but what is it you are doing to help the wind energy industry to actually deploy wind and meet these goals?
Good afternoon. And yes, indeed, in Europe we have set very ambitious targets for ourselves. As regards renewables, we do believe that by 2030, many of our member states will meet the targets with the help of wind, and mainly with the help of offshore wind. We have set many work streams, but I think that it is important to tell you that these new projects are built around the sea basin approach. In European Union, we have 5 sea basins, and the most advanced territories are in North Sea. So countries, governments around the North Sea have set their targets 111 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030. And of course, other sea basins like Baltic Sea, even Mediterranean, are aiming to set their targets from where I am coming from European Commission. We are accommodating these projects by supporting the Crete development. First time ever, European funds could be used also to co-finance offshore Crete developments that will connect these projects to the mainland.
Okay.
And we are also providing support to our industry. You might have heard about the Net Zero Industry Act that covers several different clean tech sectors.
Yes.
And wind is very prominently covered by that. And on top of that, just last month, we presented the Wind Power Action Plan that is fast-tracking all the activities that were announced in previous years.
Right. The other thing that is going to be talked about here at COP28 and may get decided to be put in the final communique is phasing out of fossil fuels. So you have to increase the supply of clean energy, but you also have to decrease the use of fossil fuels. Now, the EU has gone through a shock after Russia invaded Ukraine and has been very rapidly moving away from using Russian fossil fuels. However, there are still countries that are reliant on Russian gas. What are you doing to get countries like Austria and Czech Republic to move away from the use of Russian fossil fuels faster?
Indeed, we had an energy crisis that was artificially created by Russians who manipulated our gas markets. And since then, it didn't took us decades or years. It took us months to build up our resilience by addressing different challenges. First thing we had to do was to cover our underground gas storage with the concept that this is a strategic energy infrastructure. By doing so, we secured that last winter we had enough gas at our disposal. And this winter, our underground gas storage is still almost full, despite the fact that there are minus degrees back home. We also presented our plan how to get rid of Russian gas latest by 2027. You might know that our member states have unanimously supported 12 packages of sanctions, but we needed more time, so gas is not covered by sanctions. But each and every member state has a plan in place for the case if Russia from their side will cut them off. And we do have solidarity arrangements in place in case if these countries like Austria or Hungary will be cut off and they are landlocked countries, then other neighbors with access to LNG terminals can help them.
Right. Well, one of the countries that's trying to do something on that is Bulgaria, which has unilaterally levied a policy on transport of Russian gas. Now, of course, the EU is a single market. Do you support these kinds of measures at an EU level?
What happened with European gas market was that many companies across Eastern Front had long-term contracts with Russian Gazprom. And then Russian Gazprom decided one by one to cut them off. Bulgarian company was one of the first ones who was left without deliveries last summer. But Bulgaria is transit country, so Russian gas still enters to Europe via Ukrainian corridor and via Turkish corridor, and then the entry point is Bulgaria. So what they have to take care of is that the very moment when they themselves don't use Russian gas anymore and the volumes in their infrastructure are smaller, they still have to keep this infrastructure operational. So we have asked them additional questions, what they are doing, why they are doing that, and the
levy.
And the levy that they have imposed is right now monitored by our services, and we will make the decision if it's aligned with our single market approach or not. Saying that, well, this has always also happened with Ukrainian transit corridor. So Ukrainians who had to close one of the entry points to Ukraine because this entry point was occupied by Russians, have to keep up their infrastructure, right. Also, despite the smaller volumes, and we do understand that this is certain burden. I, from my side, have been very how to say, I expressed my understanding that if Ukrainian transit agreement with Russia will expire next year, yes, and they don't launch any negotiations with aggressor, then we totally understand that.
Right. Well, coming to Ukraine, one of the things that the EU is going to support Ukraine with, especially on energy, is reconstruction. Now, the UNDP estimates, and this is back in April, so 8 months ago, was that $10 billion worth of damage was done that affects access to 12 million people when it comes to electricity. When the EU supports the Ukraine with reconstruction, first, how much money is the EU willing to provide for it? And then what kind of conditions would you place on the country so that the energy they produce is zero carbon, green, also tied to climate targets, if any conditions at all?
First of all, we don't know the exact disruption and how much will it cost to rebuild, because this activity against civil infrastructure is ongoing. You follow the news, well, each day there are new news of Russians launching missiles and drones against civil infrastructure. On top of that, Russians are occupying, the troops are occupying Europe's biggest nuclear power plant in Zaporozhye. So until Ukraine has not been able to restore control of the territory, the risks are there. But the European Union is supporting Ukraine. We announced in the beginning of this year that we will launch bonds worth of 80 billion, and under the macroeconomical assistance, we have already made decision to deliver 15 billion this year. This is this overarching support. On top of that, last year we launched a support facility to help Ukrainians in this very difficult situation when civil infrastructure and energy infrastructure was damaged. We started to ship them all the equipment, devices, auto transformers and even cables that they needed to restore what was possible and build up new connections if damage was not repairable.
Well, and are there going to be any conditions in trying to make the grid any cleaner than it already is as it's being reconstructed, or is it just transmission?
This morning I had a meeting with Ukrainian vice ministers. My counterpart, Minister German Galushenko, was not able to travel here because in Ukraine they had snowstorms that cut several regions out of grid connection, and then on top of that the continuous disruption caused by Russian attacks. But what we discussed was that next week in Brussels, European leaders will decide if we will start accession negotiations with Ukraine and Moldova. This was a proposal made by European Commission. I strongly supported that because despite the ongoing war, Ukraine and Moldova have made significant necessary reforms.
Right.
They have delivered a lot also in the energy sector. And that means that if we will build, if we will invest into Ukrainian economy, then this will be built around the accession negotiations, so that we already know that one day they are one of our member states and will be aligned with our acquis, and of course will be important members of our single electricity market.
Now, our time's coming to a close. I want to end with two questions. One, to finish on this point, which is, well, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán has so far been against Ukraine joining the EU. He asked for the agenda at next week's EU budget meeting to be struck off. But is the entire EU in support of reconstruction assistance to Ukraine?
Since war started last February, 24th of February, EU leaders, all 27, have been able to agree on sanctions. So to cut the Russian revenues and to send a clear message that this kind of aggression will have consequences. And that each and every decision to implement new sanctions meant that all our leaders were on board. On top of that, we have been supporting Ukraine since the very first day. I myself, I do believe that it was very important that we connected Ukraine with European synchronous area, and that meant that when last autumn, the very moment when weather started to get worse and in Ukraine people needed heating and access to electricity, then we were the ones who were able to keep their lights on, who made sure that the load shedding was kept minimal. And this was possible only because we had public acceptance across Europe.
Right. Now, a last big picture question. We've just come off the Dutch elections, which we don't know who the Prime Minister will be, but could be somebody who's not supportive of climate policy. Of course, we've seen what Hungarian Prime Minister's views are on climate change. There is just a increased support for politics that would be populist and go against climate action. In that process, how are you as leading energy policy thinking about meeting EU's goals while the politics swings sometimes in the wrong direction?
I think that in countries like Netherlands, when they always do have coalition governments, one single politician doesn't change the course of the nation. So Netherlands has been very ambitious in their climate policy, and of course they have been more cautious on the EU enlargement. But usually coalition governments will keep the overall policies in the mainstream, and this is I hope also the case here. But we will have elections next June for European Parliament, and of course that will also decide what will be the priorities for next 5 years. So very decisive time of the mandate ahead of us, and I hope that next year when we meet again, the things are settled, and everybody understands that Europe will keep the track. And saying that, our member states have presented their national energy and climate plans. They are very ambitious. So it is clear already that we will cut our emissions by 55%, might be even more ambitious if all the plans will implement in real life.
Thank you so much for your time. It's been short, but it's been very insightful.
Thank you.